You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
This episode contains graphic depictions of violent crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
It was a Tuesday in April 2003 when an emergency phone call was made from a visitor at 20 Grass Tree Close, Bridgeman Downs in Brisbane's north. The phone call was made by a 33-year-old man named Massimo Sica, known to most as Max. The purpose for his visit, according to his testimony, was to see his on and off again girlfriend, 24-year-old flight attendant Neelma Singh. Neelma was the second eldest child of Shirley and Vijay Singh, who had migrated to the northern suburb of Brisbane 10 years prior from Fiji, along with their 4 children. At the time of the emergency phone call in 2003, Shirley and Vijay were away visiting Fiji. Max would later tell police that once he ventured inside the house, he noticed bloodstains on the carpet of Neelma's upstairs bedroom. He followed the blood. But as he got closer to her parents' bedroom, he heard the sound of running water. When Max stepped inside the ensuite of the main bedroom, he claims to have found blankets piled into the spa bath. There was water covering the floor, overflowing to such an extent that the ceiling below was buckling under the weight. As he removed the blankets, he says he uncovered the body of Neelma. Inside that spa bath were also the bodies of her brother, 18-year-old Neelma Singh, and her 12-year-old sister, Shirley Singh. They had all been murdered. Suddenly, police were looking at a triple homicide in a quiet Brisbane suburb. What unfolded would become the longest murder trial in Queensland's history. According to some experts, however, there remains a number of questions that still, almost 20 years later, do not have answers. I'm Jessie Stevens, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. In today's episode, I'm speaking with former detective turned private investigator Graham Crowley. Graham's joined us on True Crime Conversations previously to discuss the disappearance and murder of Leanne Holland. Since then, he's turned his attention to Neelma, Kunal and Shirley Singh, who were found dead in their Brisbane home in 2003. Graham, can you talk us through the facts in terms of what we actually know happened on April the 22nd, 2003, to those 3 members of the Singh family?
Sure. Max Sica turned up at the house somewhere between 2 and 2:20 p.m. with his 3 children. He had been trying to contact his girlfriend, Neelma Singh. She wasn't responding to texts. She wasn't responding to phone calls. The home phone wasn't being answered. So he turned up at the house. He could see 2 cars in the garage. They only owned 2 cars. There was no answer to the door. The place was locked. He found a door around the back ajar. He went in, he searched the downstairs area, went upstairs, saw a blood trail, followed the blood trail and found the deceased in the hot, bubbling spa bath in the main bedroom ensuite.
Was there any sense of how long these bodies had been there? When was the last time they'd been seen alive?
Well, therein lies one of the issues with this case. The last confirmed contact was Sunday night, which was around 36 to 42 hours before that time. They stopped communicating. All 3 children were prolific communicators, and they stopped texting, emailing. No one could contact them. So that was the last confirmed contact, the Sunday night. One neighbour says that she saw the youngest girl on the Monday morning about 9 o'clock. Other neighbours, there was 4 neighbours at a barbecue directly behind the Singh house on the Monday night at about 8 o'clock. They heard a piercing female scream coming from that house, together with a gunshot. Another neighbour heard a disturbance in the house at about midnight on the Monday. So there's some conflict over the actual time of death, complicated by the fact the forensic pathologist, was only able to say death was somewhere between 4 hours and 2 days. So anything's possible.
Do we know what the cause of death was? Because as you say, they were found in a spa bath. Was that the cause of death, or had they been killed before they were placed there?
Neelma was strangled. The other 2 children were bludgeoned. And the youngest child, Sidi, who was just 12 years old, she died from head injuries, blunt force trauma. Cornell, the brother, he was unconscious when he was put into the spa and drowned. So 3 different types of murder, actually. Very sad.
And they lived in the family home. Where were the parents at the time of this murder?
This is a Fijian Indian family who migrated to Australia around 1991. And at the time of the murders, they had gone back to Fiji for business. The father continued a business that export from Australia, import into Fiji. So he was backwards and forwards a lot. And Shirley Singh, the mother, went with him at this time.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Singh family? Were they a happy family, or were there some tensions in the lead up to this horrific tragedy?
Very hard to start talking about that family. Very, very dysfunctional. The whole family it was just incredible. The father was having multiple affairs with multiple women. Shirley was into prostitution. The father was beating the wife and all the children regularly and viciously. Restraining orders had been taken out on him by his wife and by the victims. It's just a train wreck, really.
And Max, who arrived and found the bodies in that state, he was Neelma's on and off again boyfriend. But what was his relationship like with the family, with Neelma's parents?
Their relationship had been on for some 18 months, and they had separated for about 2 to 3 months in February 2003. But apart from that, they were in a relationship for the 18 months, and they were back together at the time of the murders. Max was hated by the Singh parents. Max is a complicated character, possibly a psychopath, spent a considerable amount of time in prison for a lot of offences, mainly breaking and entering, arson, things like that. No history of violence, though, and certainly no history of violence towards women. He was defined as being manipulative, controlling, stalking Neelma at times. But during their relationship, no verbal abuse and no actual physical violence. He ticked a lot of boxes in relation to control and intimidation, but ticked no boxes in relation to violence. But that doesn't mean to say he didn't do it. There is evidence of people who don't do physical violence and then go off and commit murder. So he wasn't the nicest character. They did have a very passionate relationship. The parents hated him with a passion. As far as they're concerned, he was not suitable for their daughter. They were trying to arrange a Fijian Indian marriage for Neelma, just as they had arranged a marriage for the older daughter. So that was ongoing at the time. As far as they're concerned, Max was too old, he was divorced, he'd been to prison, he was unemployed, and just not suitable for Neelma. And unfortunately, and sadly, they did not entertain or consider at all what Neelma wanted.
Max had released explicit material of Neelma. I think it was during the point they were broken up. What happened there?
Yeah, well, this is just a good example of what sort of character he was, They had taken nude photos of themselves. So he released nude photos over the internet via email to the family, to friends, to the Indian Fijian community. It shamed Neelma, it shamed the parents, and that's what he did.
So Max finds these 3 bodies and he calls 000. From there, a crime scene is established. What sort of evidence is initially found at the crime scene? Is there anything tying him or anyone else to what's happened?
Well, that's one of the interesting facets of this case. After almost 6 years of investigation, they did not find any blood, DNA, hair, fibres, bleach, anything to connect Max Sica to those murders. And of course, he strenuously denied being involved in the murders, but they could not find one iota of evidence that connected him to us. So it was just a circumstantial case of, well, he might have done this and he did that, and from that we can infer this happened and that sort of thing. So there was 17 points of circumstantial evidence and a confession, and I use that word loosely, to a female friend that made up the 18th point.
So this woman, this female friend of Max's, says that he confessed to her. Can you talk us through the confession? What made people so suspicious of it when they listened to it?
He does not actually confess to the murder, to her. She says, "Do you regret what happened?" He says, "Yes, I do regret what happened, and I wish I could take it back." She doesn't go any further with that, and neither does he. Now, does he mean he regrets killing them? Or does it mean he regrets sending those photographs? It could mean a whole lot of things. So there was that sort of innuendo, and they talked about, what if, and how would a killer do this, and what would he do next? And it was this sort of scenario talking.
And in terms of the circumstantial evidence, what did the court look at? What was there that was tying Max to this crime?
Well, there was some good circumstantial evidence. The police said he was the only one who was expected there on the Sunday night. Because around 9 p.m, Neelma messaged him and said, "We'll see you later tonight and then we'll chat. I think I'm coming down with something. I feel like that day before he gets sick, we'll give the one ring." So that was an SMS at 9 o'clock. Now, for the week that Shirley and Vijay Singh had been in Fiji, he was slipping over there every second night and staying the night with her or a few hours with her. But they had to be quiet and discreet because the brother was under strict instructions from the father, who he feared, and the father flogged him mercilessly. He was under strict instructions. If Max Sica turned up at that house, you are to tell me. So they had to be discreet. And so the police said, and it's a fair comment, he was expected there that night, and he was the only one who would be expected there. And when you look at it, if Max Sica didn't do it, who did? Because it wasn't a random slaying. It was a targeted attack on these people. So, you look at it and say, well, who else could it be? And for a long time, they looked at Vijay Singh. He was extremely angry over the nude photos, and he'd beaten her over previous indiscretions. So they looked at him for it, but the guy's in Fiji at the time of the murders. So who else could it be? And as you know, I came across this random guy who happened to be in the middle of the murder investigation, who's a career criminal who's actually been involved in murders before. And it took me down another one of the 101 rabbit holes I went down on this case.
So can you take us down that rabbit hole? Because a criticism of some police investigations is that they become too pointed on a suspect too early, and that once you have a suspect, you stop looking with a helicopter view at all the potential scenarios. What did you discover about another line of inquiry that maybe wasn't explored as much as it should have been?
Okay, well, when I started this investigation, there was 1,100 police statements that I had to read. There were 1,500 job logs issued that police followed. There were 1,600 crime scene photos. It was just a huge volume of evidence. But what concerned me was that from day one, there was written evidence that the police considered Max Sica the prime suspect. And that really concerned me, because once you get those blinkers on, it's very hard to not look at anyone else. So during the course of the case, Max Sica met a guy in prison who recruited him when they both got out to join a kidnapping gang, to kidnap a rich Chinese man and hold him for ransom for $10 million. Max told Neelma, and Neelma actually she went to at least 2 meetings with this guy who was running this gang, who was organising this crime. She was running around telling her family, do not say anything about this kidnapping, because if it gets out, I could be killed. And guess what? She was. So around June 2002, about 9 months before the murder, the kidnapping gang is arrested and charged with plotting the kidnapping. And it was evident, they knew within a heartbeat, that it was either Max Sica or Neelma Singh who had given them up to the police. The police had been following them. They'd installed bugs on the phones, on the cars. There was surveillance. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they were very, very tooled up gangsters. They had firearms, they had tasers, they had a lot of stuff. They were prepared to go hard. So they were arrested, but they weren't considered as suspects for the murder, because at the time of the murders, they were in prison awaiting trial. And I just happened to, you wouldn't believe it really, I just happened to Google the guy's name who was the ringleader. And I get a link in Solomon Islands. And it turns out in 1991, he was in business over there. He owed a guy $300,000 and he organised for him to be whacked through an intermediary. And a dude goes up to the guy's door in Honiara at night. The guy opens the door and he shoots him in the head, kills him. Through a stroke of luck, the charge was dropped. What happened was the guy that he recruited to do the murders turned evidence and was going to give evidence against him. So he recruited a prison officer to murder him. But instead they took this bloke off the island to another island for his own safety. When the plane was flying back 4 months later for Joe's trial, the plane crashes and the witness is killed along with everyone else on the flight. So through lack of evidence, the charges against Joe were dropped and he fled to Australia. And this wasn't known by Queensland Police. And I'm saying, had they known this guy's very, very violent past, would he have potentially been a suspect in the Singh murders? And he was never considered a suspect.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Jessie Stevens. I'm speaking with private investigator and podcaster Graham Crowley, who's been investigating the triple murder of the Singh siblings in his podcast Loose Ends. The crime scene that was left following the murders, does it look as though it could have been the work of a career criminal? You spoke to someone whose job it is to profile offenders, and she provided an idea of what type of person could be responsible for this. What did she come up with, and did it match with Max?
Look, it was what's called an organised crime scene. It wasn't a random hit, as I said. These people were targeted. The Crown case was that it was a crime of passion and that he got angry with Neelma and strangled her and then murdered the witnesses. But there's so many holes in that story. The killer brought bleach to the house and cleaned up an area of tiles downstairs with that bleach. Now, the Crown case was that somehow Max cleaned bleach off Neelma, and that's why that was. But more likely, there was blood or something there that killer wanted to dispose of, because that DNA could connect him to the crime. Max Sica did not have any injuries on him and nothing to connect him, as I said. So there's this curious bleach issue where the killer has brought bleach to the house. And as I said, Joe from the Solomon Islands, Joe Cool, the kidnapper, when they arrest him, what's he got in the boot? A bottle of bleach.
In terms of clothes, footprints, fingerprints, is there anything there that links Max to the scene?
Yes. Well, going up the stairs to the first floor, there was a footprint in the carpet, and it was faded, and the forensics concluded it was because Max stepped in bleach and then stepped on the carpet as he was walking up the stairs in socks. Now, they flew a guy over from Canada, ex-Mountie, and a woman with a PhD from Adelaide. What they concluded was that they could not exclude Max Sica as being the person who left that footprint. They couldn't say he was, but they couldn't say he wasn't. And that was pretty powerful evidence for the Crown case in one of the circumstances. And what they found was that fingerprint powder had got onto that footprint and showed up the footprint so they could properly see it. And from that, they could compare it and then say, well, it could be Max Sica's. We can't exclude him. Max Sica's solicitor got Bond University involved to replicate that test. So they put bleach down on carpet, then they put fingerprint down on carpet, but they couldn't get it to form this outline like the Crown could, no matter what they tried. They couldn't get an outline. But when they put fingerprint powder down first and then stepped on it with bleach, up popped the image, back to front. And there's only one way that could happen.
In terms of an alibi, what did Max say he was doing during the time he was apparently murdering these three people?
The only window of opportunity Max Sica had to have committed the murders, he was with people, he was linked everywhere else. So the only window that was available to him was 11 p.m. on the Sunday night to 7 a.m. on the Monday morning. So the police said that's when he murdered them. Now, his brother, his brother's girlfriend, his parents all saw him at home that night. The next door neighbour saw all three cars outside the house that night. At late, she saw them at 1 a.m. because they were packing to go away to a national park. So she was up packing, she looked out and saw all three cars. So this is where it gets into the realms of, well, so the police refused to take a statement from her because it was not suitable to their case. They refused to call the brother and the girlfriend because they were unreliable. They had an allegiance to Max, so the Crown wouldn't call them. And the defence barrister, he wanted to retain the right to speak to the jury last. And if you call one witness, you forfeit that right. So he wouldn't call any witnesses. So we've got a bizarre situation where there's people who see him at home, but the jury don't hear about it.
Yeah, you would think that that's the stuff an alibi is made of. Most people are at home with their families most of the time. You would think that's a strong enough alibi.
You would, but not here.
So what else did the court use to defend Max? He obviously can account for some of his time during that window of opportunity, But how did they argue with all the circumstantial evidence? How do you then defend a man who, in many ways, is a good fit?
Well, it was a circumstantial case. So it came down to the Crown said, well, we say he was there that night. We say he got there at 2 p.m. on the Tuesday afternoon. The defence said, no, we say he wasn't there that night, and we say he didn't get there till 2:20 p.m. on the Tuesday afternoon, because that became relevant as well. The police said he got there at 2 p.m. and he spent some 30 minutes in the house before he called 000, and he couldn't honestly and innocently account for that. And when I first read this, I thought, oh boy, if he spent 30 minutes in that house, he's got a problem. But the defence case was, no, he did not arrive till 2:20 and he only spent 5 minutes. He called the police at 2:30. So by the time he got out and he looked in the windows and da-da-da-da, so he only spent, literally 5 minutes in there. And so it come down to, do you believe this side or do you believe that side? And there was no clear-cut answer. There were witnesses who said he got there between 1:45 and 3:15. No, it was just the time that he could have got there was just out the window. So it was just unreliable witnesses.
The court ultimately found him guilty. What was his sentence? Because it was, history-making in terms of its severity, wasn't it?
35 years. The longest prison sentence the Queensland courts have ever handed down.
There's been a petition made to pardon him. What's the basis for that petition? And do you think it's going to garner any traction? Do you think it's a possibility that he could be pardoned at this point?
Well, there's been 2 petitions. The first one was rejected. That was based on the evidence of the witnesses, the brother and the girlfriend, who saw him on the Sunday night. So there was that petition that went in relation to that. And together with that, the defence found a forensic pathologist who said death was more likely to have occurred about 12 hours before the bodies were found, not 36 to 42 hours. Because if you remember, I said the original forensic pathologist said somewhere between 4 hours and 2 days. It was just, that's the best he could do. So there's this huge window when they could have been murdered. When you look at the lack of communication and whatnot, it could well have been more closer to the 2 days and 12 hours. But the defence produced a forensic pathologist who said, no, based on my experience, death was more likely to be 12 hours. So that petition, the Attorney General refused to deliver it to the Court of Appeal. So it's dead in the water. But since then, the defence have put up a further petition, and I think it's got legs. I think in that one, they're relying on a case where the police refused to take a statement from a woman because her evidence was favourable to the defence. So they refused to take a statement from her. And the jury and the court never heard her evidence. And he was found guilty. And then later it came out that this woman had contacted police, and the Court of Appeal overturned that conviction based on the fact they refused to take that statement. And here you've got the Sica case. The next door neighbour saw all 3 cars there at 1 a.m. on the Monday morning, and they refused to take a statement from her. So Max Sica's solicitor said, well, this case is a mirror of the case where the conviction was overturned and a new trial ordered. And that's what I'm requesting here. So that's before the Attorney General now. And who knows, it could be 3 months, could be 12 months before he makes a decision on that.
Do you think it'll happen? Do you think they'll order a new trial?
The last thing the Queensland Government and the Queensland Police is a retrial of this case, I can tell you. It lasted 77 days. The investigation lasted 6 years. The evidence that has come out since that trial, I honestly believe that if Max Sica went back to trial, he would be found not guilty in a heartbeat.
The last thing I wanted to ask you was, and this is an important thing in terms of framing the podcast, I think, do you think Max is innocent, or do you think that Max Sica just didn't receive a fair trial? Because they're two different things.
They are very different things. When I started this podcast, together with the rest of Queensland, I believed Max Sica was guilty, without question. When I started going through it, and I got real concerns with the evidence, but I thought, no, he's still guilty. Episode 12 is almost ready to drop. In episode 10, I said, I don't know. I honestly don't know if Max Sica is innocent or guilty. I just don't know. But the stuff that's coming out in 12, further information in relation to Joe Cool, old mate from the Solomons, I'm leaning towards Sica not being involved and this kidnapping gang being right in the thick of it.
Interesting. And I was watching footage of Max Sica's mother saying that, you know, there'd been cover-ups and absolutely outside the courtroom, devastated as you would be. And it's quite easy to dismiss someone in that state. But as you say, there's a lot of interesting, I mean, the podcast is called Loose Ends. It's called that because there are a lot of things that just are not adding up. So it's a really interesting case to reappraise.
You know, when I was looking around for a name, I came up with that because there are just so many loose ends. After 6 years, you would think if the police had spent 6 years investigating this matter, they would have tied up every query and question mark. But there's just dozens of them that, what about this and what about that? And, you know, I talked about the bleach. That's just one. On the one hand, it's a crime of passion. On the other hand, he's brought a bottle of bleach with him so he can murder Neelma and then clean it up. You know, there's just a lot of question marks.
Graham Crowley is a former detective turned private investigator who's been looking back at the evidence surrounding the Singh siblings' deaths. You can hear his full dissection of the evidence against Max Sica in his podcast, Loose Ends, The Singh Family Tragedy. You'll find the link in our show notes. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast hosted by me, Jessie Stevens, and my executive producer is Gia Moylan. If you'd like to find out more about the show, don't forget to join our online community. Just search for True Crime Conversations on Facebook and make a request to join.